the most senior Soviet KGB officer in London, is also Britain's most valuable spy. He has been feeding Soviet secrets to MI6 for 11 years. He has just been promoted to head of the entire London station. Every active agent in the country, every cipher, every Soviet operation in his hands. And in 7 weeks, his own service will recall him to Moscow. Because someone, somewhere, has just betrayed him. His name is Oleg Gordievsky. The man who betrayed him is not Russian. He is American. He works for the CIA. The British have not told the Americans Gordievsky's name, but the Americans have figured it out anyway. This is the story of how a Soviet colonel spied for Britain for 11 years, helped prevent a nuclear war, and was smuggled out of the USSR in the trunk of a car. Past sniffer dogs, past KGB watchers, the man who built the operation, the American mole who blew it up, and the part of this story that most accounts get wrong. I am Tom, your host on Forgotten Europe. Let's get into the story. August 1968. Oleg Gordievsky is sitting in a flat in Copenhagen, where the KGB has posted him as a junior intelligence officer. He is 29 years old. In the next few minutes, he will decide to spend the rest of his life working against the system that put him there. His father had been an officer of the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, the predecessor of the KGB. Oleg has grown up inside this system. He is, by background and training, exactly the kind of man the Soviet Union builds. He is listening to the BBC. The voice on the radio is describing 20,000 Soviet troops and 2,000 tanks rolling into Prague. It is the largest military operation in Europe since the Second World War. The Czechoslovak government, which had been trying, very carefully, to reform communism into something more humane, has been crushed in a single night. Gordievsky listens to the end of the bulletin. Then he turns the radio off. He does not call the embassy. He does not file a report. He sits in his Copenhagen flat, and he understands, for the first time, that the country he has been trained to serve is not a country that can be reformed. It is a machine that grinds people down, and it is built that way on purpose. Most people, when they lose faith in the system they work for, leave it, they quit, they emigrate, they become novelists. Gordievsky did not leave. He stayed inside, climbed higher, and waited for someone from the other side to ask. The someone is the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. His name has been on a quiet British watch list for years. A Czechoslovak intelligence officer named Stanislaw Kaplan, who defected to Canada in 1969, had told Western services that of all the Soviet officers he had ever served alongside, the one most likely to turn was a young man named Gordievsky. The British do not approach him directly. They watch, they wait, they look for an opening. The opening, when it comes, is a badminton court. A British diplomat, actually an MI6 officer, plays Gordievsky at a Copenhagen sports club. Then again, they become friends in the slow, deliberate way that intelligence services manufacture friendships. Lunches, dinners, books exchanged. By 1974, MI6 is ready to ask the question. Gordievsky says yes. His MI6 code name is Sunbeam. He is not a defector. He does not run to the West and ask for asylum. He keeps his rank, his uniform, his career. He goes on running Soviet operations in Scandinavia in fluent Danish. Except now everything he runs, MI6 sees first. 11 years. I want to be specific about what those 11 years actually looked like for him. Every working day, he walks into KGB offices, salutes KGB superiors, signs KGB documents, files KGB reports, and passes copies of those reports to MI6. He writes false reports for Moscow that MI6 has helped him write. He recruits Soviet agents while telling the British everything about them. He sits through KGB lectures on how to detect Western moles, knowing that he is the Western mole the lecturer is talking about. The Soviet Union does not put traitors in prison, it executes them. Sometimes, according to KGB legend, it shows the recordings to new recruits. Gordievsky knew that. In 1977, on a routine rotation back to Moscow, he attends a lecture at KGB headquarters. The speaker is Kim Philby, the British double agent who defected to the Soviet Union in 1963 and had been living bitterly in Moscow ever since. Philby tells the young KGB officers that he has visited the headquarters of many of the world's leading intelligence agencies. And now, after 14 years in Moscow, he has finally been invited to visit theirs for the first time. Gordievsky sits in the audience. He looks at Philby, and he sees what becoming a defector to the wrong side looks like. A used-up old man, bitter, forgotten, used by the Soviets while he was useful, ignored once he was not. He decides he will never let himself become that. In 1978, he is recalled to Moscow because he has divorced his first wife and married another woman. And the KGB considers this immoral. His career stalls for 4 years. MI6 keeps the operation alive on a slow drip, waiting. Then, in 1982, the KGB sends him to London. When Gordievsky arrives at the Soviet embassy in Kensington Palace Gardens, his MI6 code name quietly changes. He is no longer Sunbeam. He is now Nocton. The reason for the change is operational caution. The CIA has been told by the British that there is a high-level Soviet source, but not who. The Americans give the unknown source their own code name, Tickle. 3 code names for the same man: Sunbeam in Copenhagen, Nocton in MI6 files, Tickle in CIA files. The British do not tell the Americans the real name. That decision will, eventually, almost get him killed. What MI6 does next is unprecedented. The KGB station in London is run by an experienced senior officer named Arkady Guk. Above and around him are several other Soviet intelligence officers in diplomatic cover. Gordievsky is junior. To use him properly, MI6 needs him at the top. So MI6 starts removing the people above him. One by one, on carefully constructed pretexts, Soviet diplomats and KGB officers are expelled from Britain, caught in compromising situations, declared persona non grata, quietly pushed out. None of them know that the reason they are being expelled is to clear the path for the man working 2 floors below them. By early 1985, Gordievsky has been promoted to resident designate, the most senior Soviet intelligence officer in the United Kingdom. He has access to every active KGB agent in Britain, every operation, every cipher, and every word of it, every name, every plan, every cable from Moscow is being read in MI6 within 48 hours. The information he provides goes directly to Margaret Thatcher. She does not know his name. She knows him only as a British source inside the KGB. Sometimes she asks for his reports by hand, in red folders, and reads them in her private study. The reports change how she thinks about Moscow. In 1984, when a young Soviet politician named Mikhail Gorbachev visits London, Gordievsky helps brief Thatcher before the meeting and after it. After the meeting, Thatcher tells the world, "I like Mr. Gorbachev. We can do business together." That sentence, one of the most important sentences of the late Cold War, was shaped in part by an MI6 file written by a KGB colonel in a Kensington flat. But the most important thing Gordievsky does in London happens in November 1983. NATO is running a large military exercise across Western Europe. It is called Able Archer 83. It simulates a nuclear war. NATO commanders go through the motions of releasing tactical nuclear weapons in stages to see if the procedures work. In Moscow, the Soviet leadership watches the exercise and panics. The next part of this story is so unlikely that when I first read it, I went and double-checked. It was still true. The leadership of the Soviet Union, old, frightened, briefed for years by their own intelligence service that the United States was preparing a first strike, does not see Able Archer as an exercise. They see it as cover. They see it as a real attack, disguised as a drill. Soviet bombers in East Germany are loaded with nuclear weapons. Soviet submarines are repositioned. The KGB station in London is told to start counting blood deliveries to British hospitals, because if the West is preparing a surprise attack, there will be more blood. Gordievsky reads the cables coming in from Moscow. He reads the panic. He realizes, before almost anyone else in the world, that the Soviet leadership genuinely believes a nuclear war is about to start. He passes it all to MI6. MI6 passes it to the Americans. When Ronald Reagan is told that the Soviets had genuinely feared a nuclear attack during a NATO drill, he says, "I don't see how they could believe that, but it's something to think about." It changes him. The historical record is fairly clear here. Reagan's tone toward Moscow softens through 1984 into 1985. The evil empire rhetoric quiets. The arms control proposals get serious. By the time Reagan and Gorbachev meet in Reykjavik in 1986, the road to ending the Cold War is open. Most of the people who walked that road never knew it had been opened by a Soviet colonel in a flat in Kensington. In April 1985, Gordievsky is summoned to a private ceremony in Moscow. He is officially confirmed as KGB resident designate in London, the most senior Soviet intelligence officer in Britain. He goes back to London. 3 weeks later, on the 15th of May in Washington, an American CIA officer named Aldrich Ames walks into the Soviet embassy, carrying an envelope. Inside the envelope are the names of Soviet officers working for the West. The next morning, the 16th of May, a telegram arrives at the Soviet embassy in London. Gordievsky is recalled to Moscow, just for a few days, a formality, to meet the new chairman of the KGB. Gordievsky knows immediately that something is wrong. He calls an emergency meeting in an MI6 safe house. The British offer him an immediate exit. He can defect today, walk out the door, and never go back. His family, his second wife Layla and their 2 daughters, currently on holiday in Azerbaijan, will be lost to him for years, possibly forever, but he himself will be safe. Or he can go to Moscow, try to talk his way through, come back as resident, and give MI6 the most extraordinary intelligence asset of the late Cold War. Most accounts make Aldrich Ames the villain of this story. He was. But the harder question, and one Ben McIntyre keeps returning to in his book on this case, is why Gordievsky went back at all. He had a way out. The British genuinely gave him the choice. They told him the risks. He understood them. He went back anyway. He landed at Sheremetyevo Airport on the 19th of May. The passport officer studied his documents for too long. No one was there to meet him at the gate, a minimal courtesy normally extended to a returning KGB colonel. He took a taxi to his apartment. At his front door, 3 locks. He always used 2. The third he had never used. He had never even had the key. The 3rd lock was engaged. Someone with a skeleton key had been inside, had searched his flat, and had relocked the door incorrectly. The KGB had been in his apartment. 3 days later, he was driven to a KGB dacha outside Moscow. He was given a cup of brandy. He drank it. He woke up some hours later with no memory of anything in between, in a chair being interrogated by Colonel Viktor Budanov. the KGB's top counterintelligence officer. The brandy had been spiked with what Soviet documents euphemistically called truth-encouraging pharmaceuticals. The interrogation lasted 5 hours. Budanov told Gordievsky he knew everything. He named MI6 operations. He named officers. Gordievsky later said the room felt like it was filling with smoke. But Gordievsky did not break. He denied everything. He demanded to know what evidence they had. He played the offended senior officer, accused of treachery on the basis of nothing. After 5 hours, Budanov stopped. He told Gordievsky he was suspended from operational duty, but not under arrest. He could go home. He was not to leave Moscow. He was, of course, under 24-hour KGB surveillance. He went home to his Moscow apartment, alone, Layla and the children still in Azerbaijan, unaware. And he understood that the next move was his. 7 years earlier, in 1978, a small group of MI6 officers had drawn up a plan for getting Gordievsky out of the Soviet Union if it ever became necessary. The plan was almost certainly never going to be used. MI6 had never exfiltrated anyone from the USSR before. The plan was kept active anyway, year after year, on the off chance. It was given a code name, Pimlico. The 7-page plan was written largely by an MI6 officer named Valery Petit. It was hidden inside the binding of a copy of Shakespeare's sonnets, sealed in water-soluble cellophane. That is what biographer Ben McIntyre uncovered when he went into the British files for his book on this case. Gordievsky kept the book on his shelf in Moscow. To read the plan, he had to soak the book in water at the kitchen sink by candlelight, with the curtains closed, on the assumption that his apartment was now bugged. The plan said this: on any Tuesday at exactly 7 in the evening, walk to a specific corner near the Kievskaya metro station, carrying a Safeway plastic bag. If MI6 sees you there, they will send a confirmation signal. The signal: a man walking past, carrying a green Harrods bag, eating a Mars bar or a Kit Kat, wearing something gray, making brief eye contact, never stopping. After the confirmation signal, the escape itself would be triggered the following Saturday morning at a specific kilometer marker on the road north out of Leningrad, near the Finnish border in dense forest. British intelligence had never tried this before. Pick up a fugitive KGB colonel inside the Soviet Union in a hostile surveillance environment where a single wrong move would mean diplomatic catastrophe and probably his death. Gordievsky stood on that Moscow corner with a Safeway bag on the first available Tuesday. Nothing happened. He stood there again the following Tuesday. A man walked past. Harrods bag, Kit Kat, gray trousers, eye contact. Gordievsky later said he stared into the man's eyes and shouted silently, "Yes, it is me. I need urgent help." The MI6 officer kept walking, exactly as the plan said. Gordievsky had 4 days to lose his KGB surveillance and reach the pickup point, almost 1,000 kilometers north of Moscow. On the morning of Friday, the 19th of July, 1985, he put on a tracksuit and went out for what looked like his regular morning jog. He had been running every morning since his return from Moscow, deliberately, to make the routine boring. He shook his surveillance car at a metro station. He boarded a train to Leningrad. From Leningrad, a bus toward Vyborg, near the Finnish border. Late on Saturday afternoon, in dense forest near the agreed kilometer marker, the MI6 convoy arrived. 2 cars. In one of the cars was the MI6 station chief from the British embassy in Moscow, his wife, and their 14-month-old baby. They had driven the entire way from Moscow under heavy KGB surveillance, then lost the tail at the last possible moment. Gordievsky was hustled into the boot of a Ford Sierra. He was given a thermal blanket to to defeat heat-detecting sensors at the Soviet border checkpoint. The boot was closed. The convoy drove on. At the border, Soviet guards inspected the cars. Sniffer dogs were brought up. The dogs walked along the boots of both vehicles. The MI6 officer in the lead car got out and unwrapped a bag of crisps, scattering crumbs on the road, distracting the dogs. The wife of the station chief, sitting in the second car with her baby, opened the boot lid slightly, sat down on top of it, lifted her child, and began to change the baby's diaper directly above the boot where Gordievsky was hidden. The smell drove the dogs off. The cars were waved through the Soviet checkpoint. A few kilometers later, on the Finnish side of the border, the lead car pulled into a forest lay-by. The driver put a cassette tape into the car stereo. The music that started playing was Sibelius, Finlandia, the unofficial second national anthem of Finland. The signal, agreed years before, that the convoy was safely out of the Soviet Union. In the boot of the second car, Gordievsky heard it through the metal. He later said he understood, in that moment, that he was alive. He was flown from Norway to the United Kingdom. His MI6 codename was changed one last time. He was no longer Nocton. He was Ovation. Gordievsky was now in Britain. The Soviet Union responded to the loss of Gordievsky in the only way an intelligence service can respond to a humiliation of this size. Within weeks of his exfiltration, 25 Soviet diplomats and intelligence officers were expelled from the United Kingdom, most of them based on names Gordievsky had handed over. He was sentenced to death in absentia. The sentence was never overturned, not even after the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. His wife Layla and their 2 daughters were detained in Azerbaijan and then in Moscow. Layla was interrogated for months. The KGB believed, wrongly, that she had been in on it. She had not. She had not even known her husband was a British spy. The marriage, in any meaningful sense, was over the day Gordievsky climbed into the boot of the Ford Sierra. It took 6 years of British and American diplomatic pressure to get Layla and the children out of the Soviet Union. They arrived in Britain in 1991. The marriage ended shortly after. Gordievsky met Ronald Reagan in the Oval Office in 1987. He met Margaret Thatcher at Chequers. In 2007, the Queen pinned a medal on him personally, the Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. It is the same honor given, in fiction, to James Bond. 8 months later, in November 2007, he collapsed at his home in Surrey. He was unconscious for 34 hours. Doctors found traces of thallium in his system. Gordievsky believed he had been poisoned, that a Russian businessman who had been giving him sleeping pills under the cover of friendship had, in fact, been giving him something else. He survived. He never publicly identified the man. He lived the rest of his life under British police protection, in a quiet house in the home counties. Putin's Russia never lifted the death sentence. After the Salisbury poisoning of Sergei Skripal in 2018, his security was tightened again. Oleg Gordievsky died at his home in Godalming, Surrey, on the 4th of March, 2025. He was 86 years old. There was no public cause of death. This is what the story comes down to. A KGB colonel, the most senior Soviet intelligence officer in Britain, a man with access to every active KGB agent in the country, every cipher, every operation. A man who walked every working day for 11 years into rooms full of his own service, knowing what would happen to him if he was found out. He was not found out by the KGB. He was found out, eventually, by an American CIA officer who needed money to support an expensive second marriage, and who sold a list of names to the Soviets that included a man whose real name the British had refused to share with their closest ally. Gordievsky was lucky. Most of the other people on the list Aldrich Ames sold that year were not. The Soviet Union arrested at least 10 of them. It executed most of them. Gordievsky was the only one who got out. He got out because of a 7-page plan written in 1978, hidden in a book of Shakespeare sonnets, executed by an MI6 station chief, his wife, their 14-month-old baby, and a dirty diaper. It is the kind of story that, if you tried to write it as fiction, no editor would believe. The British secret state kept most of it secret for decades. Some of it is still secret. What we now know about it, we mostly know because McIntyre got access to MI6 sources for his book in 2018, and because Gordievsky himself was interviewed by a BBC podcast in the years before his death. If you want to know what one Soviet colonel, sitting in a Kensington flat, writing reports in red folders for a prime minister who did not know his name, was able to do for the world, the answer is more than almost anyone alive in 1985 would have believed possible. He helped stop a nuclear war. He died in his bed. Both of those things are true.